So in this video I'm going to record a quick presentation on how I want you to use scales if you're with me for coaching. I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this one in comparison to the circumference measurements and the progress pictures, because everyone always gets flipped off by the scales and they just want to throw it out the fucking window. So we'll get into it. So what does it not measure for a start? It does not measure fat loss directly. Doesn't measure short-term progress. Okay, it differs between sexes a bit because of hormones within the menstrual cycle, but doesn't measure short-term progress. It won't tell you if you've ruined your diet, so you can eat very well and the scales will still go up because of fluctuations. It doesn't represent your nutrition quality, so you can eat very healthy and the scales might still continuously go up if you're consuming too many calories. And of course, it doesn't measure your fucking worth at the end of the day. It's just your relationship with gravity. Okay, so I'll go into these in a bit more detail. So what does it actually measure then? So it measures your current weight. That includes water weight, etc. that I'll go into now in a bit. It indicates whether or not you've been in a calorie deficit or surplus over time. And again, this is only over the long term. You'll still have short-term indicators of whether or not you're just storing water weight, but you'll only know whether or not it's representative of your energy balance or your calorie balance over the long term. And it can indicate that you might have lost fat. Again, over the long term, it's kind of a case of you've definitely lost fat if the scales has went down. So what makes up body weight then? So this is basically what the scale measure compromises of. Okay, so obviously body fat, muscle mass, we both know those, but also organs, water, food, and bone. We don't take these into account, and some of these can change. Okay, so the ones I've highlighted here in red, these are the ones that can change and affect the results on the scales, not including any like technical issues with the scales. So with body fat, obviously you can change that, you can lose it, you can gain it. Muscle mass, you can lose and gain that, sometimes at the same rate as body fat. Especially if you're losing muscle by not training correctly. Organs typically don't change. Some of them can gain weight, but it's the exceptions there. Obviously you'll get more skin as you get older, but I left that out for obvious reasons. Same with bone. Bone can actually change. You can increase your bone density, especially by resistance training, but the increase there is negligible. Water is something that changes a lot. You can fluctuate between 2-3 kilos, maybe even more in some circumstances, water weight, which will affect the scale results. And the food you eat, the food that's in your intestines, the food that's in your stomach, etc. So again, the ones I've highlighted here in green, these are the ones that can actually change the scale weight in the short term. Okay, so it's important to know that these two things here will actually affect what you weigh in the scales. And so will the two red ones, but these are more long term. And then the white ones are kind of ones you don't need to worry about. So, stuff that can cause short-term change. So this is typically like 1 to 3 kilos, might be slightly below and slightly above that as well. I mentioned water and food. However, there's also a shit ton of factors that affect changes in water and that affect changes in food. So in terms of water, you have things like carb intake, supplements, stress, hormonal changes, fiber intake, exercise, temperature, and injury. They're only just a couple of things. I'm only touching the surface there. So you have all of these things that aren't all related to diet anyways, that can affect water weight retention. Water weight is not something we should be worrying about. No one comes to me with the goal saying, I want to lose water weight. It literally does not matter. It does not change how you look. It means absolutely nothing. So all of these things there affecting water weight, affecting the scales, these are essentially things that you want to ignore. We don't want to be worrying about water weight. We don't want to be trying to reduce it because it will fluctuate by itself over time as there's a myriad of factors that affect it. Food, then there's less things that affect it. I might have missed out on one or two here. Obviously tolerance and how fast kind of it moves through your digestive system. Same with fibre, that will dictate how fast it moves through and whether or not you're holding on to kind of more food bulk as well. Fibre, that will also dictate water weight as well. So another one. So out of all the factors that I put on the last page, there's also sub-factors that will affect them. For example, time of day will affect what you see in the scales because of food intake, exposure to stress, etc. So time of day might impact carb intake because you have breakfast in the morning. Time of day might impact stress. You might be more stressed when you start work or after you finish work, which would impact water weight, which would impact scale weight. So you have a lot of sub-factors here as well that might be hidden to you. And yeah, there's even more things that affect a change in the scales. These are important to know about, again, so you can interpret the scales correctly. So what causes immediate change in the scales? So these are things people sometimes don't pick up on. The surface the scales is on, make sure it's not on carpet. Make sure it's not on uneven floor or kind of wet surfaces or things like that. Have it on an even floor, ideally kind of a wooden floor or I try and avoid tiles where I can, because sometimes the bottom parts of the scales can kind of go in between the tiles, and that can affect the result. And again, it kind of depends on the tiling as well, but wooden floor is typically best. Where you stand on it, this is with more so older scales or dodgy ones. So if you stand on the edge, sometimes you weigh less than if you stand in the middle. Make sure you stand in the same spot each time. The brand of scales, again, in terms of the quality, how it works, digital or mechanical, make sure you get a digital, they're more accurate. Battery life as well can impact the result in the scales. Faulty and functioning as well, which kind of relates to all the above. So you might be thinking there the scales is fairly useless. It's absolutely not. It's just people use it wrong. They're using it to measure progress in the short term. And as we've looked at there, it's nearly impossible to do that because you have so many confounding factors that affect mostly water and food weight. Still a good tool, as I said. We just need to control for that stuff that causes fluctuations above. It's unrealistic to control for all those factors. We can't be, keeping, like I listed at least 10 altogether in the last few pages. We can't be controlling for all those. So instead, we control for time by collecting averages. Okay, so if we get averages of our weight over time, it will balance out then, and we'll get a better graph representing our progress, albeit in the long term. So why you should weigh daily. Here are two examples showing one person weighing daily and one person not weighing daily, and how it can impact the average and how you interpret the scales. So look at the right example here first. We have someone just weighing on a Wednesday, and they're weighing in at 83 kilos, and they might have weighed 82 kilos the week before, and they might have been like, that's shit. I made no progress. I tried my absolute best that week. What happened? Could have just been water weight, and they're saying, fuck you scales, they want to get rid of it. Person on the left here weighed every day. They've added all of these 7 figures up, divided by 7. You always divide by the number of weigh-ins you actually get to get the mean, and their mean was 81.9. So it's over a kilo in difference compared to this person here that got 83. We see they both got 83 on the Wednesday. So you can see there how the averages can give you a much more accurate result over time, and they can control for water weight fluctuations. Now this still wouldn't be accurate if it's just over 1 week. You actually want to collect this over multiple weeks and then look at scale change month to month. For women then it will change in comparison to men, which I'll go into in a bit. So for men, get 3 full week averages. Expect 0.5 to 1.5% body weight change per week. And again, this will show out an average over time. You're not going to see this every single week. Or roughly a pound or 0.5 kilos or more per week on average. Okay. So this is kind of what your weight loss might look like. So you could do it. You could track your weight and it might look like these different scenarios. So week 1 might be 80. Week 2 might be 80 as well. Week 3 might be 79. See how it's not gradually going down. It might gradually go down, but it usually doesn't. You could have 80, 79, 79. You could have 80, 79, 80, and 78. In which case, you're still making good progress in all of these. They're all ticking the boxes up here. They're just not showing up how you might expect. For women then it's a bit different. You have to use the scales over a longer time period because you have the menstrual cycle which interferes with things like water weight. Okay, so get averages for a full menstrual cycle. So wait for a full cycle to pass before you interpret your weight. Expect heavier weigh-ins 2 weeks before you bleed, okay, especially the week before, and expect the lightest weigh-ins the week or 2 after the bleed. Okay, now this is just water weight in relation to the menstrual cycle, so you keep in mind there's a lot of other things that impact water weight as well. And if you're expecting to be lightest the week after you bleed, but you have a lot of other things that are bringing up your water weight, then that might not be the case. Okay, so here's what it might look like if you're making progress. 80, 81, 81, heaviest before the week of the bleed, 82 and 79. And this arrow here represents where you should be interpreting your weigh-ins. So week 2 versus week 2 of the following cycle. And that's based on an average 4-week cycle. Obviously you want to interpret it at the same point each time, but this is just based on an average 4-week cycle. If you're struggling to understand that, send me a message and I will clarify it a bit more for you. So just a summary and everything then, make sure you take daily weigh-ins if you're using the scales, make sure to get weekly averages, always weigh in at the same time of day to control for water weight. Use time to control for fluctuations as well, so don't interpret results too soon. Wait for at least 3 weeks to pass and use other metrics in combination with the scales, like circumference measurements and progress pictures, as you get a more accurate picture of whether or not you're making progress.